Right, you're right to go, Susan.
Okay. Well, Jill, I was just wondering if you would be able to explain what Earth Canvas is and how you came about creating Earth Canvas with the connection between land and artists.
Well, Earth Canvas started in 2019 with the idea that there was lack of connection between some of Australians' leading artists and regenerative farmers. And being a regenerative farmer down near Holbrook, I'm actually part of a group called 8 Families. And we've been doing holistic management, regenerative farming type practices, you know, some of us for 30 years, some for 6 years. But there are 9 families in the group. And we've got these beautiful properties. And we thought that if we asked some leading Australian artists like John Wolseley, Janet Lawrence, Idris Murphy, Joe Davenport, Rosalind Atkins and Jenny Bell, if they could be connected to one of those regenerative farmers and create a connection so that the artist can learn from the farmer and the farmer learn from the artist. And it's been a really successful program. And originally it was just to have open days on farm, but it developed into something much bigger when the Australian National Museum got involved, and they could see that this was a turning point in history. And there was the industrial model of agriculture was essentially, they said, not working, and there was a more regenerative approach to agriculture. And so they felt that this was a time in history that needed to be recorded. Hence, we were able to attract quite a lot of funding from the government to put together these 70 artworks that the 6 artists produced on the farms. And we now have a travelling exhibition that's going around to 4 states and finishes up in October this year up in Canberra at the Australian National Museum. And the idea of Earth Canvas came when John and I were sitting around a table and talking about art and farming. And I said to John, I think we can do this, because we were both concerned about climate change and that we weren't able to do anything effective. But we felt that by connecting the artists and the regenerative farmers, we could actually try and get people to look at the landscape with love and empathy, and also empowering people, or anybody that eats food, that they can actually do something with their food choices and the choice of the way they manage their disposing of rubbish from their houses, etc. We just wanted to empower everybody to be part of the climate solution.
So were the artists exposed to before and after landscapes of these farmers?
Well, Jenny Bell's actually a regenerative farmer herself out of Goulburn. John Worsley's got an ecological background and very connected to the landscape, just totally engrosses himself in the landscape and has a very deep understanding. And someone like Janet Lawrence, and Janet's very much an environmentalist and activist, but she actually didn't really have much to say positively about farmers. And when I asked her about joining the group, she said, oh, no, farmers are ruining the landscape. And I said, well, come and find out what regenerative farmers are doing. And so it's been a really fabulous experience for Janet.
Wow. So what do you feel that you have learnt through connecting the artists? What have you learnt from them?
I've learned an enormous amount, but John actually worked on Bibbaringa, and he spent quite a few months here coming and going over the few years, and still comes and goes. But so we've developed a great friendship. And I've learned so much from John about looking. And John said once, if I want to paint a tree, I have to paint and paint and paint the tree until I become the tree. And it made me think that's exactly what it's like for me. If I'm wanting to put a new fence line in or do some leaky weirs or contours, I'm actually walking the landscape, being in the landscape, sitting with the cattle. I just become part of the landscape. And then all of a sudden, wow, it happens. It's so clear that the decision of what I've got to do next. And it takes away all the confusion, and it just becomes a clear white line to follow. And John also got me to look at the landscape, that I'm actually a landscape artist, in that every mark I make on my property, which is 1,000 hectares or 2,500 acres, which you can see part of it behind me, I'm actually being a landscape artist, and that's been quite empowering. And I look at my property as the canvas.
The canvas, yeah. Thank you for that. So, John, just to bring you into the response to the landscape, what have you learnt from regenerative farmers about the landscape?
Now, I think I can answer that question. I think perhaps by going back a little bit to just describing that I'm a very old landscape artist, and I've painted landforms and ecologies all over Australia, and quite a lot of the time I've been painting the really dumbed down, sad, totally cleared landscapes in the south, and I was always finding myself in a state of such sadness that was incredibly difficult to paint because the landscape isn't working, and the ecology has been disrupted. And so when Jill came up with this wonderful idea, what I've learned from that is that I was able to actually to go to Bibbaringa and see a landscape which had been sort of 20, 30 years ago would have been incredibly dumbed down and bland. Very few plant species, the river running, the creek running down to the sea, and incredibly dry. And what I was able to do, where I was so lucky, was I was able to discuss with her what she'd done. And what she'd done, as she said, she is a landscape artist, is she'd put big stretches of replanted trees, and then she had made the river into a series of linked ponds and slowed the water down. And then she had put these contour banks in certain areas so that the water, instead of rushing down to the sea, goes around and then feeds the kind of marshland bits, or the wetlands, which are sort of like sponges. And so in the paintings, there's one come up on the screen now, I think, which shows the water being diverted, instead of going down to the sea, going round and hydrating the land. And so those are the kind of things I've learned.
Is that through natural sequence farming, Jill?
Yes, I've applied. I've got a totally open mind about what sort of theories and principles I applied at Bibbaringa. But natural sequence farming, I've got to the stage once I'd planted the trees and proved the ground cover, like the image I just showed you briefly then of, that's what this landscape looked like when I arrived in 2007. And the image behind me now, this one that I'm sitting in front of, that's exactly the same image.
Wow.
So I've planted 60,000 trees and I've improved the ground cover out of sight. So I have 100% ground cover all the time. And then I've got contours. So somewhere there you'll see a contour that's maybe there's dams and linking and going around there, which John was talking about.
Yes.
And so I do holistic management, which is planned rotational grazing, where all the cattle are in one mob and they move around and the plants are allowed to recover.
Yes.
Before they're grazed again. I can be on 180 to 240 day rotation, and I've got 70 paddocks. So depending on the size of the herd as to how fast they move.
Yeah.
But essentially I'm running about 500 at the moment, but this season I'm going to be running up to 750 on the 1,000 hectares.
Well, that's totally amazing to see the visuals of a before and after, because that's really quite an incredible transformation. that you've achieved. In
Yeah.
what sort of time frame have you?
I've been here 15 years,
Mhm.
and I hope to get to where I am in 10 years, but I'd say I achieved it in much earlier than that, because we went through some tough times. There was still a millennium drought back in 2007,
Yeah.
but this last year we've had the most incredible season. The photograph behind me was taken 2 years ago. That was before the last two fantastic seasons, so it looks even better now.
Better now. Thank you for that. John, just how do you connect with the land, and how do you express that connection through your art?
Oh, can you say that again? I'm here, sitting here in this garden, and there's a whole lot of corellas which are flying over. And what's rather amazing, you might see on the screen, there's an Araucaria tree, a most wonderful bunya pine. Can you see it?
Yes.
And I only mention that because all these these bunya pines were where I painted similar farms in Chile, and where the Mapuche harvest the bunya pines, and the actual land before the Chilean white farmers went there was unbelievably fertile. But that I'm going right off topic here. Could you ask your question again?
That's okay. We're collecting bunya pines and eating the nuts at the moment, actually, in Northern Rivers. So there's an abundance of them. If you roast them, they're really quite delicious.
Yes.
So as an artist, how do you connect with the land, and how do you express that connection through your art?
I think my primary excitement is that when you're making a painting, you are almost farming the canvas. That's to say, when you a painting is about very often the movement of water, the movement of the air, and the way the rocks relate to the earth, and then we have the way the vegetation is in certain areas, and all those sort of things. So when you're actually painting, when you're painting a good painting that really works, you've got all these things like the water flowing over, and then you've got the sort of the rock stratas, and so when I paint somewhere like Bibbaringa, as I hope you might see in those paintings that I've done, there is a sense that you're almost recreating the land on the canvas.
So are you using watercolor, oils, acrylic paints on paper, on canvas?
Well, with this project, I did about 10 watercolors, and watercolor, when you're doing big studies of this kind of thing, is simply marvelous, because you take the brush, which is loaded with paint, like that painting up there, and you squidget it along, and it falls down the canvas, very much like working in the same way as the water does when it's actually hydrating the landscape. And so that watercolor was simply marvelous for those sketches. And then I used oil paint to develop bigger paintings.
And so do you, I've read that you do rubbings with soil and immerse your material into the earth. Was that a process that you did at Bibbaringa?
Yes, I normally use all manner of strange techniques. But the fascinating thing is that when you actually paint traditional pastoral Australia, like these wonderful farms, there's such a tradition of the use of oil paint, So with the McCubbins and the Streetons and the Heidelbergs, and then there's Lloyd Rees, and then there's and so I'm actually extending. Somehow oil paint is the most wonderful medium for painting that kind of country. I don't quite know. So at the moment, I'm doing lots of oil paints of the chains of ponds, marvelous landscape down here in St. Arnott and towards the border town, and yeah, so I'm having an absolutely gorgeous oil painting binge.
So coming from the UK and doing your art studies at St. Martin's in London, the landscape in England is totally different from our Australian landscape and our horizon, our colour and our light. Were the Heidelberg artists and Streeton and Fred Williams and people, did they influence your work?
Well, the intriguing thing there is that the old English farming methods early on were to do with a lot of the same things as were imposed on Australia. And in fact, all these things like water meadows and systems of ponds were all done in England. And the reason I know about this is that when I inherited a farm in the west of England, and the trustees said that unless I was going to be a farmer, they'd sell it. And so I rushed off to Cirencester Agricultural College to prove. And so I did a degree in agriculture in the Cirencester Agricultural College. So that I know about all these sorts of dynamics, and I came bottom in all the main subjects like veterinary science, but I came first in grassland management. And so now when I look at a landscape like Bibbaringa, I can use all my knowledge of and to know that if you bring up the organic matter and the health of the soil, you will then get vast amounts more nutritious herbs, and so that the farms I'm painting in Australia that have been regenerated have got simply marvelous, and so I know about all that because of my training. And then I became a farmer, and I was so bad that I had to give up and went on with the painting.
Was Cirencester teaching regenerative agriculture or conventional agriculture? Maybe that's why you were coming bottom, because you were more interested in the regenerative agricultural systems rather than the conventional.
Oh, absolutely. What I've found is in England that they'd ruined the land in such an appalling way, and that the industrial farming was coming in back then in the 60s when I was a hippie and things like that. And the thing that what happened there was that I was so fed up with industrial farming and the fact that all the bird species were plummeting, and because I've always painted insects, a quarter of the butterflies that I painted became extinct.
Yeah.
Just in that short period of time. So that's one of the reasons I came to Australia, was to find a landscape which was vital and living. Yes.
And Bibbaringa would have returned a lot of the native grasses and native trees to that landscape.
Oh, absolutely. And you see, it's very funny, you see, when a painter's talking about this kind of thing, what one's talking about is that you're painting the side of a hill, and if you were Monet and you were in France, you get all that gorgeous frontalism and impressionistic quality because there's so many different colors in the ground. And so when we painted Bibbaringa, I had the same thing. So I hope in my paintings I've got a sense of the richness of the growth, and then the farmer in me takes over. And I think I noticed that all the farms around there, and some of the other farms that I've been painting, they've during the drought period they just got rid of their cows. But the farmer in me gets so excited when I'm painting those hills with masses of growth that I get very excited doing that.
You're totally immersed in the landscape. You're becoming part of the landscape. It's I've got goosebumps hearing what you're talking about. You talk about systems, and you've covered this a bit, but just is there anything more that you'd like to say about how you depict the energy and life of the land in your art making? Probably more techniques as to how you bring out that energy and life.
John, what about talking about how you see the landscape as the lungs and the heart and the veins and arteries?
I all the time. Well, a long time ago, I talked to. There was a wonderful painter called Roger Kemp that some of you will know. He was an abstract painter, but I showed him one of my paintings, and he said something very interesting. He said that a good landscape painting, that's perhaps a good traditional landscape painting, you have to show a vertebrae or a backbone, and I've sort of developed that into discovering that when you look down on a landscape, a lot of the organic processes and the morphological processes that happen have got analogues in an animal or human body, so that what I've had such fun with the various of these paintings is to say that where the water is going down a faster run, and then it goes into a place which has got a sort of leaky weir, and it's pausing the hydrology, then it goes out and into what is the equivalent to livers or kidneys, which were purifying it. And then when I'm painting the trees, they're the equivalent of the lungs. If you see what I mean, you might be talking about the land as being a human body. Well, the lungs and the gills are the trees, and then there are lots of other rather fascinating analogues you can make. And the main one is that if a body loses its one part of those things, like the purifying liver or the areas which hold the water, then the whole thing doesn't work so well. So what I hope you'll see when you look at those paintings is the sense that this is one huge, wonderful body. I haven't expressed that very well, have I?
Oh no, I think you have. Yes. That's very inspiring, John. Thank you very much. are you still running workshops? Do you run workshops for artists?
I don't anymore, because I'm ridiculously old, and I'm now actually enjoying going off into very wild places and just getting on with my own work.
Yeah,
But I did do a lot of workshops in northern Australia. So I've traveled through these amazing landscapes with the Arunta and the Yolngu people, and so I did do quite a lot of workshops then, but no longer. Yeah.
Well, we'll have to follow your work and see where you're exhibiting and follow Earth Canvas, and hopefully we'll be able to see the Earth Canvas exhibition as it visits regional galleries in Australia.
I think the closest to your area, Susan, will be up at Tamworth, which will be in April to June.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes, so I'll keep you on the loop there.
Oh, well, we'll definitely, because Tamworth's not that far from us.
No, we've got an opening and there's going to be 2 farm days, one at Uralla and one down at Willow Tree, which is to the south. So they'll be on farm, as well as there'll be tours around the exhibition as well.
And will that be, so it's opening in April and it'll run till June?
It runs to the middle of June, yes.
Wow. Well, that's a substantial amount of time then.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And will you be visiting?
Yes, I'll be at the opening. I think it's on the 25th of April. And then.
And John, will you be able to visit the exhibition?
Oops, frozen.
I've lost you. We had a pause there.
Well, goodbye and thank you very much.
How are we going for time, Jim?
No, John, Susan just asked you, do you plan on going up to Tamworth? But you'll probably go to Canberra, won't you, when it's in Canberra?
Yes, I'd love to go up to Tamworth, but I probably won't be able to. Funnily enough, the Bunya Mountains is where I have done quite a bit of painting, so I'm often tempted to go up there again.
How are we going for time, Jill?
Well, we've been over 15 minutes, definitely. I didn't actually keep the time. I thought you were in charge of that.
Look, I'd love to keep talking, but I am conscious of time and your time. That I really appreciate you spending this and sharing your knowledge and what you've done with our community. So we might leave it there and hopefully ignite some curiosity for people to follow Earth Canvas and to explore more of John Wolseley's art making.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye. Bye, John and Susan.
Bye-bye.